Hello, this is Jamie from USA Rugby Training and Education. And in this video, we're going to just take you through a little bit around the tackle height law change that is coming into effect for the membership year 2024-25. First off, a few things about the change. USA Rugby actually announced in April this year that it would be adopting the World Rugby opt-in variations from the beginning of the new membership year, September 1. And that was on the back of some significant work that had been done previously. There was a tackle height study group that met last year, provided recommendations to the board, and there was work done to try and look at the way that this had been implemented by other countries and identify the lessons that they had learned and make sure that we were adopting the best form of the law change in the US when we did so. Ultimately, though, now there has been successful adoption of the tackle height change in almost every major rugby playing country on earth, and it's about time that the US joins their number and implement it ourselves. So we did have a trial in the spring friendlies in the Midwest Senior Club competition, and this was pretty important for us to get some data and some feedback from participants. We sent a survey to coaches, referees, players included, to help us tweak exactly how we were going to implement the tackle height this time around, and it was very useful to get some feedback. Primarily, it reinforced for us that we were on the right track and that there wouldn't be any change of the actual approach. But we did look at providing some slightly changed wording to provide better clarity on how to apply this variation. And I'll show you a little bit of the feedback here. So first and foremost, in terms of people worrying whether this would be a massive adjustment to the game, we've got, I think it was over 75% of people felt that this was a moderate, a little, or no change at all required by coaches, players, and referees to adjust to the new laws. So really only 2 in 10 people felt that this was a big change, and most people felt that it didn't take too much to adjust to the approach. So we knew we were on the right track there. Secondarily, there was some indication that while over 50% of people were either extremely clear or very clear about how the law was to be applied, we did have 50% of people who, almost 50% of people who thought that it could have been clearer and were only somewhat clear about, or worse, about exactly how that law should be utilized. So we've added some additional language for the implementation from September 1. So what is the actual law here? What is the variation what is happening? We are moving the line of a penalty kick from the line of the shoulders. So previously, a tackle above the line of the shoulders would be a penalty kick. We're moving that down now to the base of the sternum. So I think it's important to note that a lot of people are worried that there'll be more cards or other kind of sanctions, or there'll be more red cards or disciplinary hearings and things like that with this tackle law in place. That's actually not correct, because really all we're doing is moving the line for a penalty only high tackle from the line of the shoulders to the base of the sternum. It's a pretty small change. Where you get cards and disciplinary hearings and all that kind of stuff happening is when you have head or neck contact. And for that, you follow the World Rugby head contact process, which is not changing at all. So there is no change to the head contact process. What we're looking at is there may be initially a few more penalty kicks, but that's about it. And the purpose of the exercise is to encourage tacklers to lower the target area that they are targeting when they go into tackle, and target more the midriff or belly area of the player, rather than be in a position where they're getting their head and shoulders into the head and shoulders of the ball carrier, because that's when the most injuries and concussions have been shown to occur. So the new law, this is how it's written. For those of you that want to have a read of this, the new law, and we put some additional language in here to really paint the picture of when this should be applied. So there's 2 new laws, one for the tackler, one for the ball carrier. For the tackler, the law still indicates that you can't tackle above the line of the shoulders in any scenario. And then it adds or tackling or attempting to tackle an opponent above the base of the sternum while either player is running an open field play. So you can see that the time and place that we're talking about here is when players are running an open field play. There's going to be a collision. That's where the potential of danger is there. And that's when we need the target area lowered. So this is not intended for scenarios when the players are not running an open field play. It could be a pick and drive after a ruck, or diving for the line close to the goal line, or anywhere where the ball carrier might be reasonably expected to dip their height. We're not going to be calling tackles for the defense, based on this law in those scenarios where the ball carrier's height would be low anyway. Having said that, the ball carrier can't do anything dangerous themselves, and we've added leading with the head into an opponent while running an open field play. So if you are in that open field scenario, you can't intentionally lower your body height and run into someone with your head. That's considered dangerous play, and that is sanctionable itself. So we have put out an infographic about this with a lot of explanation around the ball carrier lowering their height and what the term open field play means and what is considered dangerous action by the ball carrier, how the head contact process is supposed to work, a couple of diagrams here. This has all now been emailed to every member, every USA Rugby member, and it's available on the USA Rugby website as well. I'd highly encourage you go and check that document out before you go any further in this video, because the next couple of videos, the conversations that end this video, will be referring a lot to what is on that infographic as to the implementation of the tackle height. Now, after reading all of that, you may have some questions, and we've got some ways to help you out and help guide and provide best practice advice. We're going to do a video for coaches and referees featuring our high performance pathways staff. So if you have questions about training or drills or how you would implement this as a coach, or from a refereeing perspective, some different scenarios you want to go through, if you submit a question by Friday, August 23, we're going to try and address as many of those as we can on a video that we're going to release the week after that in the lead up to September 1. There's a link on the screen here, or you could use the QR code to go and submit your question. So get that in by Friday, August 23, and we'll try to address as many of those and try to provide as best advice we possibly can. Secondarily, there is a game management guidelines webinar that is on Tuesday, August 13, and that will be available. Usually that's for referees, and that will be available on the Rugby Learning Centre from Wednesday, August 14, and that will be open to every USA Rugby member who is interested. They can go and have a read of that, go and have a watch of that on the Rugby Learning Centre, which is accessed through Rugby Explorer. Once you log into your Rugby Explorer page, there's a button on the left for Learning Centre. Go there, and that will the webinar will be put up there. In addition, you might know in the email that we sent out to all members that there are a few other law changes happening at the same time as the tackle height. If you've got any questions about those, feel free to email laws@usa.rugby, and someone will get back to you with an answer. So moving on now to the second part of this video, which is a pair of conversations that I had, one with a coach, one with a referee, in the lead up to the Midwest trial. And we provided these videos to the people who are going to be involved in that Midwest trial. And now we're making them available to the wider USA membership. First off was a conversation with Colin Finnegan, who is a coach who has been running the tackle height rollout for the Irish Rugby Union, and just to talk about how he has found implementing the tackle height variation from a coaching perspective. Secondarily, Keith Lewis, a referee and the laws coordinator for World Rugby, and we have a discussion around how that rollout has gone, and also, I mean, he's a current referee, and how he has experienced dealing with the tackle height variation. So those two videos are next. So they both each go for about 15 minutes. So I hope you find them useful, and I hope you submit some questions to for the video that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Check out the game management guidelines, and good luck on the field implementing the new tackle height law. Thanks to everyone for watching, and thanks to Colm Finnegan for joining us. Colm is the National Rugby Development Manager for Irish Rugby and a coach in his own right, and has been responsible for the rollout of the tackle height law variation across Ireland for the last little while, which I'm sure has kept him busy. Thanks, Colm, for joining and being willing to chat to us a bit about how things have gone with you implementing this.
Cheers, Jay. Thanks for having us on.
Okay, so let's go and ask first and foremost, how has the process and the adoption of the tackle height variation gone in Ireland? Has it been smooth? Has it been rocky? How has that happened from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think it kind of comes in a number of different ways. There's waves of different, I suppose, parts to it. You initially, speaking of the coach myself, all good coaches will find a way to adapt and get around any law that there is. So, we're seeing little pockets of how different coaches are using the new adaptation in different ways. But in general, there's been really positive response on the ground, and a willingness to adapt to what they know is going to be better for player safety. And I think, look, we did a lot of consultation, and we've tried to get out on the ground as much as we can and to speak to coaches and players to kind of get their feedback. And I think the big thing is that they're not finding it as a massive change. They're seeing, a lot of the same exercises, drills, reduced activities, games work for the newer, lower tackle height, and would have worked in previous years as well. So I think the fact that it's not a huge change has really benefited in that regard. But overall, it's been quite the positive response.
That's great to hear. Have there been any kind of indications yet? I'm not sure exactly how you're tracking this, or just anecdotally, have there been any indications from a safety point of view that the approach seems to be working?
Yeah, well, look, we're very early into the data collection around this, even though we're coming to the end of the first season. But all the early indicators are saying that it's basically doing what we'd hoped it would do, which is reduce the amount of head injuries for the ball carrier. And look, that was the key part within everything, and that was why this law adaptation was decided to be brought into place. It was what we wanted to focus on within that. Obviously, there's many things that you could go and look at within a safety element, but that was the kind of key in our perspective, and it certainly seems to be trending the right way. The big thing for us, the law adaptation, it creates almost a gray area. So in the past, if you went and did a high tackle, technically, if you're above the line where it is currently, you go above that, you're into yellow and red cards and kind of high sanctions. What we've done is kind of create a gray area. So if you go slightly above that baseline of the sternum, you're going into penalty territory. So whilst there should be possibly some more penalties in the initial times, it should actually keep more players on the pitch from both a safety and a legislation point of view as well.
Right. Okay, so what we're talking about there is where the players are targeting, knowing that rugby being the game that it is, sometimes they're going to be slightly off, and if you're targeting here, slightly off is going to leave you in trouble. Whereas targeting here slightly off is going to only result in a penalty. It's a good way for people to think about this. How do you think generally, and how have you done when talking to players? How do you think coaches should kind of approach talking to their players about the variation?
Look, with any change or adaptation, there's always going to be fear. And I know, speaking to my own players, and be that players that we work with from a representative side or players that we work with on the domestic game, which I'd be embedded with, there is that kind of nervousness to begin with. But realistically, it is a very small change that we hope will go and give bigger results. And I think it's key to emphasize that with your players. There can be a lot of noise out there and a lot of opinion, but when you state facts, it's a change of 4 to 6 inches depending on where you are, and it's not a dramatic adjustment. Players can still double tackle, they can still make dominant hits, and teams can still use defense as a pivotal point in matches, just as they were able to do previously. And none of that has changed, or none of that has been taken away out of the game. So it's really important to re-emphasize that with the players to make sure that they're bought in, because along with match officials, they're the two kind of keys within all of this. They're the ones who are going to be actually taking part in the tackles.
So, I mean, you must have had a range of different feedback from clubs and coaches and people as you've gone through the process of implementing this. What have been a couple of the notable kind of challenges or concerns that people have raised about it, either about implementing it themselves or the way it's been refereed or anything along those lines?
Yeah, look, again, the one of the challenges is that idea of consistency. And it's consistency of interpretation of what the law is, and then on what the subjective lens that everyone sees it through. So my lens is going to be different to your lens, is going to be different to anyone else's. So, that alignment across match officials, players, coaches, it has to be key within it. And it has been a challenge. There's been times when, I suppose, if we've rested on our laurels, it becomes more challenging. So it's about keeping that conversation going. But it's important to remember, and the way we kind of look at it is that in any match official, player, or coach is going to interpret each law through their own lens. So it's about making sure that you have that common understanding before you start any game, to go and, in the same ways you'd ask about speed of players rolling away after a tackle, or, what constitutes a ruck being formed, in a certain way, or what's a good clear out. It's just getting that alignment with the match official before the match, and just saying, look, tell me what your interpretation is of this, because that's how we
I think
adapt.
the one you're looking for is when's the ball out of the ruck. That's what refs do the most, I think. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a topical one. But like that, what how a ref's going to referee an offside line. All these things, they're all in law. They're in black and white in law, but everything goes through a subjective lens then when you get out onto the pitch. So it's just making sure you have that conversation, making sure that your understanding is the same as the match official, as the player, as the coach is going to be. And it just creates that alignment. And even though we're all working off the same script, and that helps, it's important that each time we go out there, we go and try and re-emphasize that.
Okay. So, part of the reason that I've asked you to help us out here is that the US is adopting the same law variations pretty much as Ireland has and New Zealand has, where we are not directly sanctioning the ball carrier who goes into whose height drops, but that is taken into account when working whether or not to penalize the ball carrier. And for coaches who are watching this, we do have a section a little later with Keith Lewis from World Rugby. So I'd encourage any coaches watching to stick around. If consistency is key, it's important that they understand the messages that are being sent to the referee. So that video is going to be up next. So just from a coaching perspective, just talking tactics now, have there been any kind of tactical adjustments, or how has the adoption of the law variation kind of influenced the way coaches are thinking about the game tactically?
Yeah, look, I think rugby in general, domestic and community level, changes every 2 years, with different strategic and tactical thoughts coming into it, and kind of trickling down from the high performance games. But it's been really interesting to see some of the adaptations teams are making to both attack and defense. So, like, I suppose one that you would probably expect is, from an attack point of view, that slightly lower element means people are now looking for offloads that little bit more, which again encourages that slightly more free flowing attacking style within it. A lot of players trying to get their hands through to go and make that, and it's been really interesting. And to be fair, I think we've seen some of the best tries that we've ever had in across the Irish leagues, because people are willing to go and try that offload a little bit more. And it's been an interesting one from the defensive side of things as well. So we're seeing more players starting to jackal to get in, because there's not as many players around the ball carrier when they go to ground. So there's a bit more clearance to actually go in and get onto the ball carrier. I know that some of the other unions have kind of found that as well. So it's creating certainly challenges, but that's the beauty of everything is how you go and get around them and how you can go and leverage them then to your own best for your own team.
If it's having that effect, I think that's something World Rugby would be excited by, contest and continuity. So if we can have more continuity and offloading and more contest at the breakdown through jackling, I think that's kind of what we want to see, right? In a good game of rugby. Okay, so let's turn now to kind of more practical issues in terms of training and preparation. And so what adjustments have been made from a coaching perspective, a training perspective by coaches that you're aware of? And are there any kind of specific techniques or drills or things that you think might be effective for coaches to implement with their players as they start thinking about this?
Yeah, look, as I spoke about earlier on in the video, it's important again to re-emphasize it is a very small change. So everything the coaches are doing now will work.
Right.
But there are definitely little things that we need to emphasize and things we can go and add that will maybe give a little bit more value. But some of the big things, and I'm sure Keith will touch on it later on, would be about how we actually bending to go down and make that tackle and how we're hinging at our various joints. So little things like your hip, your flexibility around your stomach, your hamstrings, so that you're able to get down lower into those good tackle positions can become more and more important. One of the things we would say, again, it's a colloquial term, is tackle below the ball. Now, obviously, if someone's holding the ball up over their head, you might not want to use that one, but it's that idea of if you're getting below the ball, you're generally going to be in targeting below the ball. You're generally going to be in a really good position to go and make a safe and effective tackle. With that idea of dominant one-on-one tackles, it's far more about the individual versus the individual. So can you go and bring in activities that are going to go and get your players stepping, moving their feet a little bit more, and actually getting into a more dominant position to go and drive through. So we spoke about the idea of players trying to offload a little bit more. So again, can you get in and start them moving backwards to make the offload harder or less effective in what they're doing? So there's some of the things that we would work on in around that. And I think that key phrase of below the ball, target below the ball, and tackle below the ball, it'll keep most coaches and players right within that.
Okay. Yeah, no, we in the subsequent conversation with Kid, we'll definitely touch on the key part of that the referee will be looking for is the body position of that tackler going into contact. So focusing on making that obvious to the referee, I think is the key thing. In all of these things, if you can make something really obvious to the referee, it'll help you out. So I think that's definitely a good pointer for people. Okay, thank you very much for helping out. Is there anything else you want to kind of encourage people or talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, look, I suppose the two things that I suppose I would kind of say is that idea of a little bit of patience, and especially with match officials, because it's not the elite game. It is not 7 replays of 15 different angles. It's one shot, one time. So you spoke about that good image, and that Keith will hopefully speak about later on. We talk about good pictures. Give a good picture. So again, if the boxing analogy, don't leave it in the hands of the judges. If you're going borderline, you're liable to be sanctioned. So try and give as good a picture as possible. And I think remember within that referee or match official has literally 1 split second to go and make that decision. So we have to try and make it as easy as possible. The second thing I'd say, and what we've seen, is just with any adaptation, it takes time to change. So regardless of how small it may be, and there'll be expected effects, and then there's going to be unforeseen effects as well. The big thing, we try and re-emphasize is the why of the trial, and it's to improve player safety. And player safety and this trial, it works hand in hand. You want to keep your players on the pitch as well as them having longer careers and, you know, being safer. So by doing this, you're actually allowing them to get less carbs, and have less players going out injured and spending prolonged periods on the sidelines as well.
You can't win a rugby game with your players not on the pitch, isn't that
Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay. All right, Colin, thank you for having a chat to us about it. We appreciate your insight there. We'll see how the trial in the Midwest goes over the next couple of months, and then we'll put what we need to together for our full implementation at the end of the year. So thanks for helping out.
Brilliant. Cheers. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks to Keith Lewis from World Rugby for joining us for a bit of a discussion about the tackle height variations from the match official, from the referee's perspective. Keith is the laws coordinator for World Rugby. He's a referee himself who's been currently refereeing the variations that have been in place in England. And of course, he is the runner of rugbyreferee.net that every referee has interacted with at some point in their lives if they have an internet connection. Keith, thanks for jumping on and chatting to us about this.
Nice pleasure. Thanks, Jimmy.
So let's start with just an overall view. Obviously, you would be heavily involved from a World Rugby perspective about the implementation of these laws across the world. How successful have the various different countries been at implementing these new law variations? I know there's a couple of changes in a couple of different countries. So how has it been from your point of view?
Yeah, well, we've been tracking it obviously from a World Rugby perspective, right from the off in the different countries as they've started this through the community game. With New Zealand started it, and it's kind of rolled out as seasons have started through the phase. So yeah, I mean, we've been interacting with it here in England. We're just coming to the end of the season in here, and mostly around sort of Northern Europe as well. And I think whenever the laws change and the game changes around it, it has a bedding in phase and a sort of initial reaction phase. But once everyone sort of understands the why behind it all and starts to referee it, and importantly works together as a game to make it all happen successfully, then we haven't seen any significant differences to the game. We haven't seen any of the sort of challenges we thought might come up as the seasons have bedded in, as games have taken place. And on a whole, we think it's been a successful rollout. As ever, we've got to see how these things play out. It's still very early days for them. We've got to see what the data tells us in a couple of years. We have to see what the experience of the participants, and that's players, match officials, coaches, tells us at the end of it all before we see where we go with it in the long term. But overall, yes, difficult start phase. But once everyone's on board and with it and getting going and playing and refereeing rugby, then it seems to have gone reasonably well so far.
Great. So, I mean, you have been refereeing this yourself in England. So what have been the bits and pieces that you've had to adjust to? What's been tricky for you to apply the new variations that you've been working with?
I think the first off was marrying the pictures that we were all being asked to think about with the reality of what we see on the field. And of course, staged pictures and staged videos of what we want tacklers to do and what we want ball carriers to do or not to do is quite easy to look at a poster. But when we're actually on the field running around, we've got all the players in front of us and around. We've got to get a good position to see what's what. Marrying those sort of mental pictures with the reality was really tricky. And as ever with rugby and the law book, we have to referee what we see in front of us, and we have to get the right ones. We might not get everything all the time, but getting the right decisions and the clear and obvious ones are the ones that we need to do. But also, from a refereeing perspective, look, we've got to show a bit of empathy with what the players are and the skill levels of the players. If it's anything like the levels of rugby that I referee, the players are out. They've been playing rugby for a long time, a lot of them, or conversely, they're still new to rugby if they're in the age grade process. So we're trying to either teach people new things who they've never done it before, or we're trying to kind of treat old dogs new tricks, which is going to involve some just time for them to get on board with changing their tackle habits. And for me, that's been a real positive in the season so far. We have really seen a shift in tackler behaviour. Which has been great, because it's all part of making sure people understand the message and why it's being done. And once they do that and they start to change their behaviour on the field, it means we don't get dragged into it from a refereeing perspective, which is of course the ideal scenario. So that's the the first initial one, remembering the why is crucial. So what are we, and how that aligns with then what we see. So what's the why? We're trying to take heads out of head and shoulder space, because where we get those high speed, high collision events on field, that's where people get injured and concussion rates, which is what's driving all this change. It's trying to keep people in the game safer for longer, without any of the sort of long-term health risks that have been we all know about, I guess, around the game. So that's the why. So if we've got heads and shoulders in headspace, those are the ones we need to really focus on.
Right.
If we don't have that, then that's kind of the ones we can manage and deal with and coach, and not really go after those really harder ones.
So everyone always asks what a definition of clear and obvious is. So you need to have a sense of what are we actually trying to address here, which is the head in that head and shoulder space.
Yeah, and the ones where I think I have more of a problem with from when I'm refereeing are the defenders that I would call uplighters. Those defenders who are used to just letting somebody run into them upright, grabbing hold of them, and then taking them to ground.
Right.
Because that's a terrible picture based on the posters that we might have seen, the images that we're trying to look at, because they're not lowering their tackle height, they're not changing any behavior, and their head is still upright. So those are the ones, if you're working with coaches and clubs in your area, those are the ones we need to try and work with harder, because they become the ones that we then need to deal with, because they are upright as the ball carrier comes into them. So we're seeing that head and shoulder space that is the one we're trying to get away with. So those are kind of those are the hardest ones, and that's a player behavior one that we need to try and work with, again, with coaches and with clubs and players in training sessions, hopefully before we then need to deal with it on field.
So, I mean, I think that's a good segue in looking at the laws that the USA has chosen to adopt, which we're going down the same path as Ireland and New Zealand and a couple of other countries in not explicitly sanctioning the ball carrier if they drop their height going into contact, unless the action is reckless. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Can you kind of talk about the situation or paint us a picture? Because it sounds like this is not the clear and obvious case that we're talking about before, where you've got an upright tackler and contact in the head and shoulder space. We're talking about a ball carrier who either they've been hit or something like that, or that they've ended up dipping into contact. And what we're saying here is we're not going to sanction either that player, and we are going to take that into account when looking at a sanction against a tackler if we do have a tackle above the sternum. Is that right? And
yeah, totally right. So let's paint some pictures. So we want the tackler to really, those are the ones we're trying to focus on in all this, really. So we want the tackler to show some effort to go lower. So where they give it a good clear bend at the waist, if they can add a bend at the knee to go with it, so they're literally painting all the really good, I'm doing that with my hand. That's the picture we want a tackler to do, isn't it? So that's the ideal scenario. And if they can do that, if they can show us that they're making that effort, then in theory, the ball carrier coming in is we're doing everything okay. So that's a really good tackler position. As you say, if we've got players who are approaching, the ball carriers approaching that tackler, and we want them to make sure that they can be tackled. They need to be tackleable within the current law. So what we don't want is that ball carrier coming in and dropping their head right down, and they're potentially causing a head contact. That's where we're going to get into that reckless issue that you talked about. But we really haven't seen that very much at all. And that's the interesting thing. We haven't, whilst in England, we're specifically penalising that action, that late and low language. We're not doing that in the USA. So it's made it much clearer. So if we get the tackler to do what we want them to do, then it's easier to see what the ball carrier then does from a safety perspective, and whether there is a high contact, a high collision point. It's generally the ball carrier that is responsible for that.
Right. So we're looking for the tackler's body position to make sure then that if there is sternum contact above the sternum and the tackler has done everything right, and the reason that we have that contact is because of the ball carrier's actions, then we can play on, or
play through.
Maybe there's a situation where we have a penalty only but nothing more, or something like that. So we're kind of taking that into consideration. So it's interesting because we're talking about the ball carrier, but what we're really saying is, hey, if the tackler does everything right and there ends up being contact because of the actions of the ball carrier, play on.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a refereeing perspective, it's really important that we communicate something. Obviously, we've got to be there. We've got to be in a good position to see it, and then we have to say something. So if we've got that good tackler position, a call of tackler, okay, tackle, fine, no problem. Just something that gets the message across that we
Play on.
tackler, everything's gone. Yeah, play on. There's nothing to see. Kind of. But I think particularly in the early days, not saying anything is not a good idea. So say something.
Right. Okay. Well, players are
say
getting
something that shows that you've identified it. You're refereeing it. The player's done nothing wrong. You're going to play through it rather than I guess saying nothing, which we might do later on.
Okay. Let's move to the issue about where the ball carrier might be considered to do something dangerous or reckless. Now, you said we haven't really seen much of this, but I think there was a concern that players would react to this law by, oh, I'll just run into a tackler with my head and then I'll get a bunch of penalties. Is that kind of what people were worried was going to happen?
It was certainly a concern here, and it just hasn't happened because the intent is that you've now got actually a bit more space. You don't need to do that. If the tackler is low and you've got a chance, you've still got a chance to offload. You can still go into the contact zone, into the tackle zone, the contact point. You can still brace for impact. And a brace for impact is very different to lowering your head into that space. If you're talking about, again, mental pictures, think about what you expect a brace for contact to look like. So for just that, and we just really haven't seen it. And the positive of that is that the ball carrier still has an opportunity to offload that ball. So we are anecdotally seeing more ball in flow, ball in play. There's kind of those offloads are coming. And that was what we heard from our French colleagues. They've gone for a waist tackle height, which is not what we're doing here, or that you're doing there. But they've really seen the benefits in terms of that the ball carrier staying upright and using the tackle to then offload. So you draw in a defender or two, and then you can still offload the ball and keep the ball in play.
Okay, so in the event that it does happen, what are we looking? We're just looking about somebody kind of cannonballing themselves in, leading with their head. That would be the kind of action that we think is dangerous or reckless.
Absolutely. And then we follow the head contact process. Yeah, if the ball carrier creates a head contact event, then we follow the process and use so nothing has changed about the head contact process. We don't need to get in. So we're not seeing in an England perspective, so anecdotally, we're not seeing red cards for head contact because they're not head contact events. Right. So we again, that was one of those thoughts that people there are going to be loads more red cards, load more sanctions, fewer players on the pitch in disciplinary hearings. Just hasn't happened because people are aware of the messaging. They're not creating the head contact event, so therefore the head contact process doesn't need to kick in.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about one area where our law language that we've adopted is very specific that this variation is to apply in open play. And we've kind of made clear that in law, kind of open play is the period between phases of play, which would be scrum, line out, rucks and mauls. So I think what the approach that we've taken is that, actions close to those breakdowns are continuations of those breakdowns, and therefore the laws that we've got do not apply in those situations. Can you talk us through why that approach has been seen to be necessary?
Yeah, it's exactly the same here, and that was again a concern that many people had here, is that how do we stop those sort of pick and go areas, and it hasn't happened. And why doesn't it apply there? Because we're talking about those head and shoulder spaces at speed. That's those big collisions are what causes the concussions and things like that. At those pick and go, pick and drive scenarios, there isn't a speed, there isn't a high collision point. It's not reckless or dangerous. It's just a sort of much lower speed controlled area of the game. So that's why we're treating them slightly differently. There was a concern that it would stop forward scoring tries because that's the way forward score tries. Clearly hasn't happened. There's been no impact there. So you can still score. You can still, as a defender, stop that play. It's in all likelihood you are going to make some contact above the sternum, but it's not dangerous. It doesn't involve head contact. It's low force and high control and high control on those areas. So it's not something we've looked at here. It's not stopped. It's not caused any issues around here. It's just, I guess, the thing to consider is at what point does the ball go out into open play? So perhaps at a quick penalty, quick free kick, where a scrum half is going to head off into the distance looking for space to go for it. That's clearly an open play. That's not what we're talking about. Right. If we've got those old pick and go to try and score those good old forwards and prop scoring tries, that's not the same picture. So we treat them slightly differently.
Okay, so our law is going to apply once that player has kind of moved away from the previous phase, and we're now into open field where the collisions and the force now make the law relevant. Is that
Correct.
fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great way of painting that picture.
Okay. Okay. Before we finish up, are there any other kind of common misconceptions or other challenges that you have seen in people implementing the tackle height variation, or anything else that you want to cover that we think that people out there who are about to embark on this journey kind of need to know before they head out onto the pitch?
I mean, really take some time to think about everything that you've got available to you, whether it's this or the other webinars in this series or the other materials that you've got. We could tell here in England the referees who hadn't been to a training session because they didn't understand the messaging. They didn't understand all the things that we've just talked about, those sorts of nuances that we're trying to apply here, and didn't really understand the why. So again, going back to that head and shoulders out of headspace, that's the core thing.
Right.
And if everyone buys into it, then the game is really not that much different, and it's inherently more safe for the participants, which of course is what we all want to do to get more people in to do it. So yeah, get your head around it. Try and if you're in a position to do so, please go and see a club, do some training with them, explain to them, work with coaches, with players, that they understand what's going on. I talked about uprighters earlier on. You'll probably, if you're at a local club, you will know who your uprighters are. So try to do some work with them to explain to them that they're the ones that are going to need to do a little bit more work to try and do it. But we haven't seen here any significant changes to the product, to the game that we referee. Yes, a few more penalties, but it's not leading to more off-field sanctions. It's not leading to more yellow cards. It's not leading to more red cards. And the game is carrying on. So yeah, get your heads around it all. Excuse the pun. Understand the messaging, all the bits and pieces that we do, and then take that into the game. And if we can do it all collectively as a game, then the best result. The worst thing is if we just go in as referees and go, we're going to do it this way, but no one else is with us. We've got to do it, players, participants, coaches, and then spectators as well.
But it's a great message for us. Thank you, Keith, for your time chatting about this. We'll see how we go with the trial that we have in the Midwest over the next couple of months before we regroup and then work out exactly what we're going to do for the fall and beyond. So thank you for joining us. Appreciate your help.
Thanks, Jamie.